See, instead of a step in a new direction, I used to look at Odyssey as a step in the wrong direction. For the long jump, this means that Mario's speed will fall down to a certain upper limit once you execute the move. Just like in the Galaxy games, if you overshoot the platform, you can use this move to reverse time, all the rewind mechanic in Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. With a few exceptions, combat and traversal captures either builds on a piece of Mario's moveset or transforms it into something else entirely. Let me ask you a question. What is the definitive sign of civilization? Like, how fast can I get up there? Or do I really need to capture that enemy to move on? Who said size doesn't matter? The way birds are handled here is nothing short of revolutionary. I am about to tear into the worst, most nonsensical argument I heard during my workstream research for why there are so many moons in Odyssey. In line with this thinking, to a lot of people, Odyssey just doesn't feel like a proper Mario game. Super Mario Odyssey is, for sure, the most polarizing Mario game Nintendo has ever released. People either hail it as the second coming of Jesus H. Christ, or condemn it as if it were a sequel to Hotel Mario. I'm somewhere in the middle. Sure, this is a fantastic platformer with some of the best controls in its genre, 2D or 3D, and the attention to detail throughout the entire adventure is nothing short of omnipotent. But it has its flaws when it comes to difficulty, and the overall variety is, for the lack of a better phrase, really hecking weak. What stood out to me, though, as I've been watching YouTubers try and explain their feelings behind their different opinions during the workstream series I've been doing for Odyssey, is that most of them don't elaborate on their opinions, and when they do, it often doesn't make sense.
The only tangible things you can get in this game are gold coins, purple coins, and moons. While these could maybe be almost enough rewards by themselves in a normal game if they were placed very strategically, in Odyssey the vast majority of these are literally just sitting out in the open.
No, it's not the vast majority of them. And even if some of them are sitting out in the open, you still go through like an obstacle course or something. It's not like you're running along a linear path and then just jumping to get moons. Either because they're plain wrong, or because they've missed important background information that explains Nintendo's reasons for why they've made the decisions they made.
At this point, I've collected every Power Moon in the game, but now I have to farm a bunch of coins in order to purchase more Power Moons for absolutely no fucking reason. If there was any proof that this game was intentionally padded out to have a total of 999 Power Moons, this is probably one of the biggest examples. It's an incredibly mundane activity that's just an excuse to increase some random superficial number.
I'm not claiming to be some kind of expert, of course, and their opinions are valid even if they come from a place of misinformation, but the added clarity of why really does make you feel a sense of appreciation for the thought that went into this game. Just to be clear, there doesn't exist a single game that is meant for everyone, and despite its seemingly universal appeal, this applies to Super Mario Odyssey as well. It's just that when the criticism and praise of the game comes from a place of ignorance, willful or not, it muddles the discourse. And that's my aim with this video, to dispel the muddied waters and provide some sort of clarity. There has also recently been some discussion around the future of 3D Mario after the release of the Super Mario 3D World port for the Switch, which also included a little side game called Bowser's Fury. I was originally going to include a mini review at the end here, but I thought, hey, this video is long enough as it is, so in the effort of trying to get this video out as quick as possible, I decided to split it off. Look for that one right here on my channel in a few weeks. Hey, or if you're a channel member or Patreon, you can go watch it right now! Before we get any further, I feel the need to let you in on my bias against Odyssey. I didn't have the same opinions about this game when I first played it. In fact, I thought much worse of it then than I do now. For some reason, this is a rare occurrence. People either love it at first and grow to hate it, or love it from the start and keeps loving it until the end. If you look at my Mario videos that I've published so far, there's a clear trend in the titles. The seeds of something great, the neglected sapling, the magnificent grape tree, and lastly, fine wine. These stem from my belief that the 3D Mario series was building up to Galaxy 2, where the previous titles were slowly refined into the ultimate platformer for each iteration, and in many ways I still think this holds true. During the course of this playthrough of Odyssey, I've slowly realized that this game isn't just a further refinement of the series, but also a step in a new direction. My original outlook wasn't that positive. I mean, this is what I had planned for the title, and this was supposed to be the thumbnail. Keep in mind, all of this was made before I even started thinking about actually replaying and analyzing the game. See, instead of a step in a new direction, I used to look at Odyssey as a step in the wrong direction. And while there for sure are still some elements of that left in my opinions, I still think this iteration of Mario is able to go up against the juggernauts of 3D platformers that are his previous adventures. Before we start talking about this game as a whole though, let's break down its most important parts one by one. Oh, and if you just want to listen to me talking about the game as a whole, you can jump straight to this timestamp. Though I will make callbacks to what I talk about, and I will also only talk about some of the game during these sections. So if you want the entire context, just keep watching. This kind of breakdown is particularly easy when it comes to Mario games, specifically because Nintendo has gone on record time and time again and stated that they usually have a certain development pipeline when it comes to these games, where they start with the gameplay and then design the rest of the game around that. Which is why I'll use this cross-section of our little planet here to better illustrate my points. The core of Odyssey, the thing the entire rest of the game is building on, is obviously Mario's movement. I guess you could also call it gameplay. This is of course not some kind of groundbreaking reveal or anything, right? I mean, Mario's movement has been the focus of all the 3D games since the very first one. Odyssey doesn't do anything new in that regard. Rather, the difference is how strong its focus on Mario's movement is. And not just about how wildly versatile he is this time around with his giant move pool with jumps that ranges from absolute necessity to situational to downright useless. By the way, I am never going to forgive Nintendo for butchering the spin jump like this. I mean, if you're going to bring over the only good thing about Sunshine, then please just make it usable, not whatever this is supposed to be. It's not just these moves that makes Odyssey rise above the rest of the 3D titles in terms of gameplay though, but also because of the general feel of moving Mario around. There's a certain weight to him this time that, and speaking of Sunshine, I never feel like they got quite right in the earlier titles. 64 was probably the game that got the closest, while Sunshine Mario didn't have any weight to him at all, especially when starting to run from a standstill. He'd just suddenly dart all around like a remote-controlled car or something. The Galaxy games were okay. However, not only did Mario feel a bit sluggish when running normally, they were also too afraid to let you build up any kind of momentum, probably because of the gravity-based gameplay if I had to guess. The spin jump would stop you in midair and the long jump would actually slow you down when you landed. And that is the main difference in gameplay feel here, the momentum. In fact, it's such an important part of having fun with this game and its controls that it's the first thing Nintendo makes you aware of. Not the capture mechanic, not collecting stuff, not teaching you the controls even. The first thing they do is force you to move the camera. Yeah, okay, no, I'm not joking. You can't actually do anything until you move the camera around a bit, but after that, you're heavily incentivized to chase Cappy, which will result in Mario running down a giant hill and, look at that. Hands out, kicking up dust clouds, and then the slowing down when he reaches the flats. It's truly beautiful. These first couple of minutes of the game serves only to show you how momentum builds up and how it drops off. You can of course also build momentum in ways other than running down a hill, like with the roll, long jump, or dive, though it's only with the roll you'll be able to actually build up to Mario's maximum speed, since the long jump and dive both work as a kind of reset. For the long jump, this means that Mario's speed will fall down to a certain upper limit once you execute the move. This can be a little bit jarring, but just with how the dive completely halts Mario's momentum, they're both programmed like this in order to facilitate more accurate platforming. I mean, challenges like this, where you have to do long jumps across multiple single blocks, which is honestly one of the hardest ones in the game, wouldn't really work if you kept your momentum through the move and just kept building up speed. I guess they could make it in a way that would allow you to build momentum, but this is just one example out of a lot of different challenges. Unlike the long jump in Galaxy though, you exit the move with a higher velocity than normally. It's the same with the dive, except it's way more important that this move in particular always propels Mario a set distance forward. That reason is Cappy. Cappy is a stroke of genius. No, really, this one mechanic opens up the entire game like nothing else, and makes movement exceptionally deep. We'll talk about the capture mechanic later, so for now we're only going to discuss his role in the platforming side of Odyssey. When you throw out Cappy, you can hold the throw button to have him spin in place for a while. If you approach and touch him during this, you'll get a small boost upwards. This is a slightly higher jump than a normal one, about the height of a double jump, I guess. You can also do this in the air, though it will kill some of your forward momentum, so you won't be able to reach Cappy to jump off of him. This move is very reminiscent of the spin in the Galaxy games, and is super helpful for minor course correction when you need to land safely on a platform when you're trying to jump on it, especially if you're coming at it with a lot of speed. And just like in the Galaxy games, if you overshoot the platform, you can use this move to reverse time, all the rewind mechanic in Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It seems like one of the videos I watched during my work streams leaked into the script. Maybe next I'll talk about how a Super Mario Odyssey compares to Dark Souls or something. Nah, just kidding. But seriously, how do you even make that comparison, Joseph? It makes absolutely no sense. He's got to have written it in to bait engagement from people rushing into the comments to make fun of him for it, right? I mean, there's just no way there'll ever be a mechanic like that in a Mario game. Oh, well, that's weird. In and of itself, the hat throw isn't that complex of a move until you start combining it with all the rest of the moves, that is. If you need to get to a high place, a triple jump is the one to go with, but with the help of a cap throw and a dive at the peak of the third jump, you'll go even higher. If you don't have enough room to pull off a triple jump, you can substitute it with a side flip, and if you don't have enough room for that even, like if you're on a very tiny platform, you can use a backflip or even better, a ground pound jump. If you want to go far, a triple jump with a bit of extra speed is still the way to go, but that's not usually very realistic considering the amount of space you'll need not just to roll, but then also jump 3 times with the heightened momentum. Instead, use the long jump. The cap throw is the only thing in the game that will disrupt the long jump animation in midair, and it's also super easy to pull off. In most cases, you won't even notice much of a difference in distance compared to the triple jump tactic. So you'll do these moves, and while it might be tempting to press the jump button just as Cappy returns after the first dive jump to get this little extra spin, don't, because it halves your momentum. Instead, you now have 2 choices. You either dive forward, at which point you give away all control of Mario since there's no way to cancel the dive animation midair unless you jump off of Cappy, or you find a wall and wall jump off of it, throw your head back towards the wall or towards wherever you want to go, and then do your final dive. The reason you want to save the wall jump until the very last moment is because they nerfed that thing to hell and back. To start with, you can't even jump off of Cappy after a wall jump. I understand why they limit the midair bounces to 1 per continuous jump. I mean, if you could keep chaining jumps like that, then obviously you could just bounce out of the skybox. But why they don't allow you to do it after a wall jump, I have no idea. I mean, you're still not getting much higher than a normal jump anyways, since there's a disproportionate amount of propulsion behind the wall jump compared to every other single jump. It honestly feels too weird. I think they made it like this so that players wouldn't be able to super cheese every challenge that used the wall jump. But while you can throw Cappy back towards the wall right after jumping off of it and get slightly higher that way, you can't actually jump off of the wall again until Mario reaches the height at which the original jump off point was. That part I understand. It's there essentially to stop you from skipping the hardest part of the Moon Kingdom by wall jumping up the side of the cliff, or skipping any part where there's moon physics really. The other, not so much. I guess there must have been some weird skips or glitches when they allowed it or something. Anyways, this whole chaining jumps together might sound a bit complex, right? I mean, after all, the entire combo requires not only a good bit of coordination, but also the utilization of, at the very least, 7 well-timed button inputs. And even then, there are still more complex combos in the game. Combos that aren't really required for anything but speedrunning and pissing people off in Balloon World, like the one I'm showing in the video right now. It's honestly impressive, and a lot of the fun that you can have in Odyssey comes from chaining together moves like this. But there's one little problem. Up until now, the combos I've described doesn't rely on motion controls to execute. These ones do. Specifically, you'll need to use the detached Joy-Cons to be able to throw Cappy downwards when in the air like this, which is a core component of the combo. This also means that you can utilize these moves while in handheld mode, which is weird considering the devs have previously stated that this game was kinda designed to make full use of everything this Switch could do, including being played on the go. in handheld mode. Not being able to use moves like the downwards cap throw and such doesn't really matter though, right? Because while they do offer some conveniences, they aren't actually required to play the game at all. Hell, they're not even required for a single one of the moves. And you can still do stuff like shake the system up and down to roll or climb faster, or whip the entire console to the side to do the spin cap move, but it's at the cost of visibility. The moment you start to move the system around like that, you'll lose the bearings on your surroundings a bit. But you don't actually need to use them, they just make your life a little bit easier. While this is true for Mario himself, it's a bit different for all the enemies you'll capture. At this point in our journey outward from the center of the planet, we've gotten to the outer core. This is very similar to the core itself. Some people might even confuse it as part of the core, but it's still very much its own distinct and important part of the structure of the planet. The reason I'm not including captures as part of the core is because the second Cappy drags you into an enemy or innocent bystander, you're not really Mario anymore. You lose everything that makes Mario Mario, and gain whatever abilities the creature or object you possess has. The game counts a total of 52 unique captures, though the picture match minigames, for example, are only counted as one capture each and not one capture for each part. The best transformations work to complement Mario and introduces unique challenges that don't rely on his core moveset. Although there are 52 transformations, some of these are nothing more than palette swaps, like the 3 different types of Chain Chomp, or the Paraguma and Parabones, or the 2 kinds of Cheep Cheep. Despite this, the variety is decent, and most of them feel okay to use, though there are only a handful of standouts that truly takes advantage of the mechanic. There's a clear divide between the different types of captures: combat, traversal, and puzzle captures. With a few exceptions, combat and traversal captures either builds on a piece of Mario's moveset or transforms it into something else entirely, and includes a certain manner of freedom in how you use them. While puzzle captures exists mainly in very limited spaces and as a solution to a puzzle and or to get moons directly without adding much or anything else to the game. Sometimes realizing that you can capture the object being the puzzle itself. I mean, pretty much every transformation, in some way or another, are there so that you can use it to collect a moon, or 3 or 10, right? I was going to go more into detail about the different captures later, but okay, let's pull out some examples of combat and traversal captures and compare them to a couple of puzzle captures. The frog, for example, which is not only a great example of an enhancing capture, but also the very first creature you'll possess, distills Mario's entire moveset into just the jump. You can't do anything else. Hell, it barely has any movement speed, but the trade-off is a massive increase in jumping capability. This is used to scale otherwise inaccessible platforms, too tall for Mario to jump up normally. You can also jump slightly higher by performing any kind of motion trigger. Another good example would be the Gushin. Capturing this enemy lets you essentially fly around for as long as your water supply lasts, the current amount of which being illustrated by the size of the water blob surrounding you. The second you run out, you fall straight down, and this mechanic is used not only to get to higher places, but also in mazes where you'll need to get from pond to pond before your water runs out. You can also spray water all around you by shaking the controller. The last transformative example for this explanation has to be the tank, or Sherm, I guess. Yeah, this is a third-person shooter now. I don't think I have to say or show anything more than that to get my point across. What all of these captures have in common are that they enhance Mario's moveset or radically transforms the gameplay style, or both, and are used throughout the levels for different things. Then on the other hand, we have the puzzle captures. This would refer to possessions such as the Chain Chomp, which are literally chained to the ground, something that makes their use limited to a certain radius around their position. And their main use is normally for puzzles that are directly linked to a power moon. The Taifu is also kind of like this, except you can move around with it, slowly. There's no technical skill here though, you merely move to where you need to go and then press a button on your controller to either move a block or kill some enemies. Despite how you're seemingly free to roam places such as Shiveria, it's still a very small level, and despite being a flying enemy, the Taifu also can't move vertically, meaning you're locked to the horizontal axes. This serves to limit your options even further. Then there's what's probably the very definition of a puzzle capture, the Moai. You use these guys to reveal hidden platforms by making them wear their sunglasses, and that's kind of it. They can't jump, they move slow, even slower when their ability is activated for some reason, and the areas they're available in are super limited. Not that you'd want to go anywhere with them though, since they're so slow. So to summarize, puzzle captures are usually confined to small spaces, either by movement limitations or area limitations, and they're usually used in direct relation for getting moons or solving puzzles, and not much else. There's one more tiny little difference between these groups though, and that is the availability of motion controls. Combat and traversal captures usually have either a secondary effect or an enhanced version of their ability mapped to any kind of motion control trigger, while the puzzle ones don't. There are exceptions, of course, like the tank not having one and the Taifu having one, but they're the outliers. For these examples, the motion control moves aren't really that important since there's little to no reason for using them instead of the base moveset of the capture, but there are a few that might make your life easier. The Goomba, for example, jumps much higher when you shake the controller, which makes you able to stack them more easily, or at all if you're targeting a triple stacked one. The Cheep Cheep's only method of attack is linked to motion controls, and several enemies like the Paragoomba, Bullet Bill, Wiggler, and so on have their basic actions sped up when you apply motion. I actually don't mind the motion controls when I'm playing docked. The problem rears its head whenever you're playing in handheld mode and you're literally shaking the entire damn system. The system with a screen in it that you're playing the game on, and that can easily get very disorienting. Especially when you're in the middle of something that requires precision jumping or stretching from platform to platform. Again, I want to reiterate that these moves aren't actually required to play the game, but just like how climbing faster as Mario by shaking the controller makes the experience much more enjoyable since its base climbing speed actually sucks, shaking the controller to fly faster as a Paragoomba also has a huge effect on your enjoyment. Maybe even more so than the climbing, since you'll be traversing much longer distances with the Paragoomba than you'll do while climbing. So it's a real shame that these moves are essentially locked behind playing with a controller, unless you want to give yourself light motion sickness by trying to keep track of what's happening on screen while you're shaking the entire display. Anyways, that's just the capture mechanic though. There are more power-ups available throughout the game. Well, there's like barely 3, and thankfully none of them makes use of the motion controls. The first one is the Jaxi. This is a rideable, animal. Anyways, it's used to quickly traverse the Sand Kingdom, which is the only place it's used because of the kingdom's size and emptiness. There's not really a lot going on here out in the dunes. The Jaxi is fast but hard to control unless you hold the brake button, something that's used to great effect in some of the challenge rooms it's involved in, so yeah, I'd say it's a worthy addition. In the same vein as the Jaxi, there's the moped, scooter, whatever, which is available in New Donk City and the Mushroom Kingdom. It's not really necessary for getting around in either location in the same way the Jaxi is. In the Mushroom Kingdom, it's basically just a prop to have fun with, though that's basically the entire point of the kingdom itself. But in the Metro Kingdom, it's actually used for a good few challenges and some really fun puzzles. The Boost Flower is different in this regard, whereas it's not really used for puzzles, but rather to get around quicker and also challenges where you need to go fast. It activates the second Cappy returns to Mario after being thrown at it, sending him into a constant high-speed dash. You can't stop until the flower runs out or you crash into a wall, but you can jump, do some mid-air stuff, and throw your cap to collect more flowers, which will add more time until the power-up runs out. It's a really fun power-up, and the only one that has an actual time limit on it. Understandably so, I guess. During the time when the flower is active, Mario can run on slanted hills that are normally too steep for him to run on with his base speed, and also on water. As such, it's used a lot in Seaside Kingdom, and really helps with traversal when there's not a Cheep Cheep or Gushin in the immediate vicinity. And that brings us to the next stop on our model, the lower crust. Or the level design, I guess. The levels in Odyssey are much more reminiscent of the first two 3D games, something even Nintendo acknowledged by releasing this comparison image. We'll explore whether or not this is an apt comparison a bit later. I'll split the kingdoms into 3 distinct types. There's the Cap, Cascade, Lake, Lost, Snow, Moon, and Mushroom kingdoms, which are the small and compact ones, and also the ones there's the most of. Then there's Sand and Seaside Kingdom, which are the big sprawling ones, and lastly, Wooded, Metro, Luncheon, and Bowser's Kingdom, which are the vertical climbing ones. Some of the levels do have elements from two categories, like Luncheon and Wooded being kinda big and Cascade being kinda vertical, but for the sake of simplicity, this is how I'll categorize them. The difference between the big sprawling levels and the vertical climbing ones is essentially the degree of verticality, while the small compact ones are just that, smaller in terms of relative area and with a more compact design. With that said, all of the kingdoms do have a certain degree of verticality to them. After all, that is the main characteristic of the 3D Mario games in terms of level design. For the visual design though, it feels like Odyssey pulls the most inspiration from Sunshine, not just because of the abstract design of some of the challenge rooms found throughout the game, but also because each kingdom feels like an actual place you could go visit, which is very in line with the overall theme of the game. And no, the theme is not exploration like so many people misunderstand it to be, it's actually traveling. While these two themes might seem similar at first glance, they're really very different concepts and carry with them different expectations. And this isn't just something I'm making up either. Yoshiaki Koizumi, the producer himself, is my source on this. According to him, the game is supposed to capture the same feeling of wonder and surprise that traveling the world does. I mean, the game is called Super Mario Odyssey for fuck's sake, and is clearly inspired by Homer's The Odyssey and its many adaptations. Not only in the sense of traveling the world in order to get back to their loved ones, but also how they both get shipwrecked twice and probably a bunch more small details that I'm oblivious to. I did think that part where Ulysses meets a ghost that turns into a hat and needs to triple jump, hat throw, dive, hat bounce over a pool of lava was a bit weird though. We'll get more into the differences of the themes of traveling and exploration later, but for now just keep in mind that they're different. Though let me pull in one aspect that supports the theme of traveling, which is important when talking about the level design: the art style. Every kingdom in Odyssey looks different, and they're supposed to mimic the difference in culture and nature throughout our planet, though sometimes the culture references can be a bit on the nose. The difference comes about because of the level themes and the unique art styles, or the layout and different objects and props that are used exclusively in any one level. This is also helped by some clever design other than art style. Let me ask you a question. What is the definitive sign of civilization? Electricity? No. People? Nope. Buildings? No, but we're getting close. Take a look out of your window. In the nature around you, how many uninterrupted straight lines or flat, smooth surfaces do you see? None, right? They just don't usually exist naturally in the environment. It's all curved, jaggy, and without direction in a sense. And this is what differentiates the kingdoms that has similar themes. Take Cascade Kingdom and Wooded Kingdom, for example. On the surface, they might seem very similar with their greenery and similar art style, but when you get further into each level, the former has the previously mentioned chaotic line work, while the latter has a lot of straight lines and smooth surfaces, which gives it its own visual identity. It's the same with Lost Kingdom and Luncheon Kingdom as well. They both use a wildly different color palette than other kingdoms. But if that was all, Luncheon Kingdom could easily have been mistaken for a daytime version of Lost Kingdom. Instead, Luncheon uses straight lines and smooth surfaces for basically every single thing in the entire kingdom, including the stuff that's supposed to be natural. This combined with the colors gives it a very surreal feeling that's unique to this specific level. This is also true for even more similar kingdoms like Lake and Seaside. Lake Kingdom uses a lot of clean lines for its environment and also has a lot of buildings around, which makes it feel like the entire level has been built by people, while Seaside Kingdom has that one light tower and the centerpiece glass or whatever with the building underneath being mostly submerged, but the rest feels very natural and undisturbed. This is the reason why I don't understand the criticism of the kingdoms being similar, because to me it's very obvious that there's a lot of thought and care that's gone into making them all visually unique. And it works, it really does, and that is a big part of why looking for moons in them is so enjoyable. And with that, we've reached the upper crust, or what I'd say is the most contentious topic surrounding this game, the power moons. I won't have very much to say about them here. I'm saving most of it for the main section of the video, since a lot of the mechanics, design, and purpose of the moons is tied so closely to the rest of the game. So let's just get a basic overview. There are a lot of power moons. An infinite amount, actually, but the game counts 880 moons divided between 836 different objectives, which you'll need to collect before you've earned 100% completion, marked by the sale on the Odyssey turning gold. You can at any time during the post-game buy moons to get a total count of 999, but the sale won't turn gold until you've marked off every objective on the kingdom lists. Moons are awarded to the player by either exploring the kingdoms or clearing some sort of challenge, be that platforming, a puzzle, or a boss battle. Most kingdoms require you to get a certain amount of moons before you can move on, and you're helped on your way by being given a series of objectives, which will give you moons along the way, with a multi-moon worth 3 moons at the end. If you're having trouble finding moons, you can get hints in the form of either the titles of random moons from the Talkatoo, though you can only have 3 of them active at once, or you can scan an amiibo, or pay 50 coins, to one of the toads to have him mark the location of a random moon on your map. And believe it or not, that's basically all I can say about the moons without spiraling into some kind of hyper-analytical rant that includes every single mechanic and design decision of the game, and just goes on for far too long. Like, I've sat here writing this for an hour and I only have one small paragraph because I had to cut out everything else because it went into too much detail. And there's still one more aspect of the game I'd like to talk about in isolation before we start analyzing the combined parts. And that is the crust. The thing that wraps this all into one giant package. The insane attention to detail. This is basically just going to be a list of all the cool, but pointless, things I discovered when I played the game. Feel free to skip to this timestamp if you want to finally get to the meat of the video though. Alright, so Mario reacts to temperatures. This might not be a huge revelation, but the game keeps track of variations in temperature depending on where in the level you are. For example, when you stand in the shadows in the Moon Kingdom, Mario will be cold. But when you stand in the sun, he'll slowly die to the cancer he's getting by being exposed to ionizing radiation. And act comfortable. Also relating to temperature, the different costumes you can buy affects how Mario reacts to warm and cold climates. If you're wearing the snow outfit in the Snow Kingdom, for example, he'll be comfortable and even fall asleep outside. If he's wearing the same outfit in a level that has a normal temperature, he'll start sweating. But if you change to a lighter outfit, he'll be comfortable again. Speaking of being comfortable, if you stand still for long enough, Mario will fall asleep. And when he has been asleep for long enough, a bird from the local species will land on his nose. Yes, even the penguins. And if you're standing still somewhere there's a source of music, like a radio or one of the instrumentalists in New Donk, he'll start dancing. Or when there's something buried under him, he'll start kicking the ground a bit. Also, since we're talking about the costumes anyways, the Mario sprite in the 8-bit section reflects every single outfit 3D Mario is wearing. And they all get suited if he's standing in smoke plumes or gets burned, sandy when rolling in sand, and so on. And there's a lot of different costumes too, at least one for each kingdom, and then Nintendo went ahead and added a whole bunch as free DLC. Some which even changes Mario's entire model. I mean, look at this monstrosity. Did Nintendo actually greenlight this? Even Bowser is deathly afraid of it. And yeah, depending on which costume you're wearing, Bowser and Luigi will have unique dialogue relating to how he looks. Some of these are really funny. My favorite reactions come from wearing the invisible cap or Peach's wedding dress. Speaking of funny dialogue, the Sphinx is awesome. It's worth answering all its questions just to get it to appear in the final gauntlet. Oh, and every single kingdom has their own unique kind of NPCs that actually start to migrate around to different kingdoms once you've saved them all and cleared the game once. There's so much detail in the kingdoms themselves too. The maps for each kingdom is actually a travel pamphlet with information on tourist attractions on the sides. Some of these even act as hints on what to do. Apparently, the location you visit in the Wooded Kingdom is inside a giant dome, and you can see this if you look at the skybox in the distance. It's clearly an artificial sky made up by a lot of different panels. The Mushroom Kingdom and the special gimmick with the moons there is awesome, though it's a shame it's all spoiled if you find the barely hidden painting that pops up almost right before you get there. The Super Mario World reference is cool though, I guess. The New Donk Festival. Yeah, that's it. If you roll or ground pound into a pipe, you get a sped up sound effect, and Mario just kinda slips in there as if he covered himself in lube before going in. Oh god, I'm gonna regret saying that. There are lights beneath the globe on the Odyssey that corresponds to each of the kingdoms, and the light starts glowing when you 100% completed the kingdoms they're tied to. Oh, and if you continuously jump on the globe itself before you've gotten to the New Donk Festival, it'll play a music box version of the Cascade Kingdom theme, and then a music box version of Jump Up Superstar after you've completed the festival. The Odyssey also has noticeable battle scars in the form of chipped paint after you repair it, the scope increasing after each time the vessel gets shot down by Bowser. It's fully repaired in the postgame though. Also, some of the souvenirs in the Odyssey interior have special reactions when you interact with them. Yeah. I think that was it, actually. But before we move on, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all my wonderful Patreons. Oh, fuck. Right, so, hey guys, I recently started a Patreon. So, if you want to support me more than just watching, liking, and sharing the work I do on YouTube, well, here's your chance. Or you can become a channel member here on YouTube to get the same benefits if you don't want to use Patreon. Participation is not mandatory, of course, but it is highly appreciated. Anyways, on with the show. Like I was saying, that's the major parts of Odyssey in a vacuum. But Super Mario Odyssey is the product of all of those parts combined, despite how much Joseph Anderson wants to deny that. So let's start exploring what that means for the experience as a whole. Like I mentioned, the number one most important aspect of Odyssey, the thing that basically the entire game builds upon, is Mario's movement. We previously talked about how this game essentially has the best movement in basically all the Mario games, at least the comparable 3D ones. But how is this utilized throughout the levels? The general gameplay of Odyssey is very free-flowing, and you usually have multiple venues in how you approach each area. Maybe you want to use the T-Rex in Cascade Kingdom to destroy the fossils that are blocking the 8-bit section, instead of using the Chain Chomp, or even just use the dinosaur to skip the entire section outright by cancelling the capture at the height of the trampoline jump next to where the dino sleeps. There are instances of choices like this throughout almost every kingdom, and not all of them relies on the capture mechanic either, but sometimes just how you maneuver Mario around and your skill in his base moveset. What makes these possibilities open up is the near-flawless marriage between movement and level design in an open world. But with the exception of optional secrets and a couple of hard-to-reach places, they never require the player to fully utilize Mario's moveset to its highest potential, despite how relatively easy it is to learn all the moves and how to combo into each of them. This means that while the skill ceiling is high, there's nothing in the game that truly takes advantage of all of these moves, and since even a moderately competent gamer will most likely master these moves pretty quickly, it makes most of the challenges feel too easy unless you go out of your way to make them harder. I actually think they do a good job of designing the open world in a way that makes this possible. It's not overly intuitive, but I think Mario's movesets, when you've mastered it, makes it feel natural to try and see how much you can get away with skipping. Like, how fast can I get up there? Or do I really need to capture that enemy to move on? Sometimes you're almost going to have to be made aware of it, but when it clicks and you start looking for these kinds of solutions, you'll start noticing new paths opening up everywhere. And I think the game gradually conditions you to do this with not just a lot of the level design, but also challenges such as the Koopa freerunning races, albeit those are only unlocked in postgame. I think the level that opened my eyes to this was New Donk City though, and maybe to a lesser extent the inverted pyramid in Toast Arena and some of the challenge rooms in Shiveria. New Donk has a lot of different ways to get up to the top of the buildings depending on your skill level, ranging from the easiest being capturing power lines to the hardest being straight up platforming up the sides of the buildings and leaping between the rooftops. In the inverted pyramid, you can jump across these pillars instead of capturing the bullet bill, and in Shiveria you can just straight up skip most of this challenge room by performing a well-timed jump combo across this gap. You might ask yourself why you'd want to make the game harder for you by not going for the easy paths, but like, you do know speedrunning is a thing, right? No, but honestly, I really do think that Odyssey's controls and design facilitates these skips and tricks, not just because it feels so good to control Mario, but also since there's almost no punishment for failing. You're not thrown out of the level anymore, and you don't have lives to worry about either. All that happens is that you lose 10 coins, and more often than not, you'll make those back with more to spare before you've even gotten to the place you died, thanks to some very generous coin placement. This is all just mostly for the open world segments though. There are also challenge rooms and other places where you are presented with more linear design. The ones that relies on a certain capture gimmick or other related mechanic like the Jaxi are mostly really fun. I mean, pretty much everyone remembers that one room where you're chased down by a T-Rex and have to escape while riding a scooter, right? These rooms are fun not only because of the spectacle, but also because they recontextualize how you use the different vehicles and captures, often introducing an added mechanic that's not found outside of these challenges. Like in this room where you have to use the Wriggler to press 2 buttons simultaneously to lower the acid sprouts, and then quickly make your way over before they envelop the tree stumps again. Or this one where you have to carefully navigate a rotating tower as a Pokio, where you can't latch on to all the surfaces. Some challenge rooms also have captures that are exclusive to them. Well, maybe it's not a room, more like a minigame, honestly, but the Chevarian Racer is an example of this. There are 2 of these races, a normal one and a hidden one. I think they're both pretty fun, though they're not always as skill-based as I'd liked. You need to press a button or shake the controller, but let's be real, no one's going to do that, as you hit the ground in order to get big speed boosts and come in first in the course of 3 laps. The map is laid out with slopes you can use to bounce off of in order to build up even more speed, but you'll sometimes be forced to hit these slopes on the wrong angles, and while you will keep going forwards, there's still a noticeable decrease in forwards momentum. You'll usually not have any trouble beating the races despite this random nature. Even the harder of the 2 should go by relatively easy unless you're extremely unlucky, as long as you're skilled enough. Compared to how they perform in the hub worlds, I feel like they mostly push the capture mechanics quite a bit with these rooms. That's not quite the case with the platforming rooms you do with Mario though. There are some which focus on specific moves, and those can be challenging, but as far as actually demanding the player to perform some of the tricks available to them in order to clear the challenge, there are none. Platforming challenge rooms are usually just either a test of patience or timing, and most often only makes use of Mario's basic jumps. With that said though, there are ways to cheese a lot of these rooms, which will require a pretty good mastery of Mario's moves. I think the first time I noticed this was in this challenge room in New Donk City. It's actually a fun room with a lot of poles you'll need to swing between, though it's not really very difficult. After clearing it though, I realized that the finish line is actually just in front of you when you enter the room, except it's a bit elevated. And as fate would have it, it is just about high enough up from where you start so that you can get up there. But not with a normal triple jump cap bounce combo. You actually need to wall jump against the building on the right to get far enough. It's super satisfying when you nail it, and I can't shake the feeling that it's too close not to have been by design. I mean, look at this one gap in the fences that you can fit through. It's like it's perfectly placed there so that you go right through it with your last dive. There's a bunch more rooms like this too, like the one where you normally would use a frog to jump between these platforms, but you have to time it with the acid waves in order not to die. See, you don't actually have to use the frog to get to the end. In fact, you don't have to use the frog at all. You do, however, need to fully utilize the cap bounce and wall jump. The platforms aren't ever too high to reach, and the waves are also comparably short, so using the frog seems like overkill. While using only Mario, you just about clear the top of the tallest waves, and barely reach the highest platforms. The acid is insta-kill too, so if you miss, you need to start all over. This is the kind of game Odyssey is. It's almost like they're taking inspiration from Yoshi's Story's variable difficulty as well. There are easy options, and then there are more difficult options. But the easy ones are always what's presented to the player, while you kinda have to think outside the box to even realize that there are more challenging ways of doing stuff. This is obviously very hit and miss for a lot of people, where some, or rather most, only ever see what's on the surface, and that's a shame. I do believe the game was designed like this on purpose though, the most likely reason for having an easy mode available for nearly every challenge being that Nintendo wanted Odyssey and 3D Mario in general, to be honest, to be more approachable for new players, and as such couldn't present the hard options as the main path, with the easy ones being hidden away. That's mostly speculation on my part though, but it does make a tiny bit of sense, right? I think a better method would have been to make the post-game harder in general instead of hiding the tough challenges in plain sight. And while the post-game challenge rooms are harder, I really wish they'd kick my ass a bit more still. While we are speculating, I guess I could mention that Odyssey has a 2-player mode where player 2 controls Cappy. From what I've said so far about the importance of Cappy as an extension of Mario's moveset, I'm sure you can see why someone else controlling him is less than desirable when you're doing complex platforming. Nintendo has gone on record multiple times stating that multiplayer was something they had intended to include from the start. They were also very secretive of this leading up to launch for some reason. I mean, it's just a co-op mode, right? Well, I think the implications are that they couldn't have included this mode if they made the game any harder. That is, requiring the player to use the cap bounce mechanic to its fullest for a lot of the platforming challenge rooms at least, and maybe for some of the late game levels. There are some areas where you actually need to use Cappy a lot, or don't even have access to him, don't get me wrong, but these are in the vast minority of challenges. Honestly, it's a pretty weird idea for a co-op mode since Cappy is doing so many different things that you'd want to have full control over. He is, for example, the main mechanic you'll use to interact with the world around you. If it looks like you can throw Cappy at something, odds are that you'll get something out of it. Be that coins, an HP refill in the form of these hearts, or even power moons are often hidden so that you'll need to spin the hat at certain objects. This is another great part of Odyssey. The world around you can almost always be interacted with in some kind of way, and this makes it more fun to explore and test stuff out just to see what sticks. I'll admit that it can get a bit monotone having only being able to throw Cappy in order to interact with most of these things though. On the other hand, the objects you can have an effect on is mostly okay and feels natural to throw stuff at, and ranges from tearing down wedding posters to pulling up poles to spinning on things for various rewards. But the most important is, of course, the capturing of enemies, which sometimes even plays into the platforming aspect a bit. Possessing enemies is the main gimmick of Odyssey, and it shows. Each kingdom introduces at least one new capturable creature. The Frog in Cap Kingdom, the Chain Chomp in Cascade, the Bullet Bill in Sand, the Cheep Cheep in Lake, the Fire Bro in Wooded, the Wiggler in Lost, an actual human being in Metro. How does the ethics behind that one work, I wonder? The Santa Cloud in Snow, the Gushin in Seaside, the Lava Bubble in Luncheon, the Pokio in Bowser's, and Bowser in the Moon Kingdom. There are a bunch more in each level, but notice how each of these behave and control differently than the rest. There are both enemies and objects that work the same, or at least very close to the same throughout, but Nintendo made sure that each level introduced at least one new unique idea for the capture mechanic. It helps the game feel fresh, but at the same time it keeps most of the captures a bit too simple, often with only a single application in the levels. If you remember back when we were talking about the outer core of Odyssey, I mentioned that the captures could all be divided into 3 groups: combat, traversal, and puzzle captures. Though the combat and traversal captures work more like subgroups in a more inclusive group I'd call transformative captures, since a lot of the enemies have elements from both subgroups, I decided to list them like this to make it a bit easier to follow along. The combat captures would be excluding duplicates like the different versions of Bro enemies, the Fire Bro, Sherm, the Pokio, the Charging Chuck, and Bowser. The traversal captures would be the Frog, Spark Pylons, the Paragoomba, the Cheep Cheep, Glydon, the Uproot, the Shiverian Razor, the Gushin, the Lava Bubble, Volbonins, the Bills, and Yoshi. With a few exceptions, combat and travel captures either builds on a piece of Mario's moveset or transforms it into something else entirely, and includes a certain manner of freedom in how you use them. The puzzle captures would then be the Chain Chomp, the T-Rex, the Moai, the Goomba, Lakitu, the Piranhas, the Coin Coffer, the Tropical Wiggler, the RC Car, the Taifu, Jizo statues, and most of the static objects you can capture like zippers, binoculars, or a man's hole. Or a man's hole. Is this supposed to be a manhole? These are captures that exist mainly in very limited spaces, either literally or figuratively based on their movement restrictions, and mostly as solutions to puzzles or to get moons directly. Sometimes even realizing the object can be captured being the puzzle itself, like the cactus or literally a rock. Looking at these lists, it might be easy to assume that the combat and traversal captures are generally the more fun and exciting to use, but that's not always the case. The Frog is a good example of this. The novelty of jumping super high wears off rather quickly, and you have very little control in midair compared to when playing as Mario. The reason jumping is so fun in Odyssey is because of all the stuff you can do in the air, and the frog removes all of this in favor of a slightly higher jump. It's also painfully slow to move it around, which is why you mostly gain access to it in closed-off rooms and tiny spaces. But when all you do is press a button, and the action that precedes it takes 3 seconds to complete from the initial jump to when you land, you get bored really quickly, and it's not just the frog where this is a problem. Enemies like the Paragoomba, the Uproot, and enemies from the puzzle category like the Taifu and even the T-Rex, when the novelty of controlling a huge dinosaur wears off, are too simple to be used in the capacity they are being used. They're one-trick captures that are given way too large of a berth. All you do with the Paragoomba is fly around slowly in the same general height. That's one button. The Uproot moves way too slow for some of the areas it's placed in and can just usually be skipped altogether with some normal platforming. And while I think it's used to good effect in the boss battle in Wooded Kingdom, that's about it. The moons you collect with this thing is just you stretching into some nuts hanging on the walls in different places. Oh god, no, Nintendo, you can't say that in the kids game. The Taifu just blows, and the T-Rex, while cool, only serves as a portable wrecking ball. You might be thinking that there are other captures that have a very simple moveset as well that I'm not mentioning here, like the Chain Chomp, the Bullet Bill, or the Charging Chuck, and while you're correct, the way they're being used makes a huge difference. What these captures have in common is that they're confined to very small spaces. The Chain Chomp is literally tied to the ground. The Bullet Bill, while not confined in a normal sense, has a time limit imposed on it, which makes you unable to get very far, and the Charging Chuck is only used in small segments. This makes it so that these captures never overstay their welcome, despite being used here and there. For a perfect example of this, just look at the Moai. It has no movement speed. Its ability is seeing invisible paths, which you don't even really need since they're so simply laid out. And they can't even jump. On paper, they're actually horrible, but since the Moais are only used in very limited spaces for very specific situations, they come off as okay. There's also the Tropical Wiggler, which is used in a similar way, where since they can't move vertically, they're placed very near where you'll have some use of them. If something like the Taifu were to be used in a similar manner, I'm sure I'd be kinder to it, and in fact, they do use it like that in one of the challenge rooms where you capture one in order to knock a bunch of Spinies into the asset. The problem I have with it arises the moment they take it out of that limited space and require you to move it around for an extended period of time. The Goomba actually has somewhat of a similar problem as the Taifu, though I'd say it's not as bad. To start with, it's designed to be moved around in a bigger area thanks to its speed, and it has multiple applications throughout the levels, stacking and not slipping on ice. Though while it's nice to not have to deal with ice physics, in reality it's not that much of a problem. The stacking is used for 3 different purposes, either reaching collectibles or platforms high up, seducing women, who said size doesn't matter, or pressing weighted switches, though there's not much difference in how you go about it. You just need to find and jump on enough Goombas to reach the height you need or the amount that's pictured on the switches. This might not sound very exciting, but they do introduce some variety by putting you in different situations. One time you'll need to jump over lasers, another you'll need to dodge spiky shells rolling down a hill. It's not much, but at least it's something. And unlike captures like the Taifu, yes, I know I'm shitting on it a lot, when you need to go somewhere with it, you're at least presented an actual challenge to overcome, instead of just floating around aimlessly. For the most part. There's that one moon in the Sand Kingdom where you need to walk across the entire desert as a Goomba to reach a female species, and that's probably the most brain-dead execution of a challenge I have ever witnessed in my life. But hey, at least I learned that the Jaxi signs are actual sentient NPCs, since characters will cower in fear and yelp whenever you approach them as an enemy. So at least I got something out of it, I guess. This brings up somewhat of an issue, actually. A lot of these levels are really big, and even if you've unlocked all the fast travel points, there's still sometimes quite a bit of distance between them, like in the Sand and Lake Kingdoms, for example. In these cases, whenever traveling through levels is slow and cumbersome, there's always some kind of option for traveling faster. Some enemy captures are actually designed almost purely for this, like the Cheep Cheep, the Gushin, and the Lava Bubble. The Cheep Cheeps especially completely saves the underwater section since Mario is a pain to move around in water. You can throw Cappy for a small boost or ground pound and press the throw button for a larger boost, but none of these moves holds a candle to the versatile underwater movement of these fishes. This in part also applies to the Gushin, except you use this capture for vertical and horizontal movement above water, making it a contender to Mario's normal movement, and in the places it's capturable, you also have the boost flower available, which is objectively the better movement modifier. The Gushin, however, since it's flying, can be used everywhere, though only until your water supply has been depleted, at which point you'll need to find any kind of water source to refill. Since it's such a versatile transformation, you can do a lot with it, and this includes certain cheeses, like getting to the top of this ledge before you're supposed to. The lava bubble lacks flight and isn't used for diving, but in exchange it can swim in lava, which aids in making exploring the Luncheon Kingdom really fun. As for traversal, you can jump into these cauldrons to be flung to the other side of the map. The lava bubbles are a bit too dependent on momentum when jumping normally though. You don't have any way of affecting the momentum while in the air either. The speed and angle at which you jump is the speed and angle you'll travel at for the entire duration of the jump, unless you pull back, at which point it will just stop completely without any way of resuming the forward movement. And this makes it awkward to control them when you're trying to platform off of tiny areas like the blobs of puke the boss of Luncheon Kingdom spits out during the last phase. It's not just enemies that are used as means of transportation though. You also have the spark pylons, the Jaxi, and the boost flowers. Oh, and I guess the poles and Velbonans could also be included here since they are used a lot in the vertical levels in order to travel upwards. The Spark Pylon is the second capture you'll encounter, and it serves as a way to connect the Hat and Cascade Kingdoms. There's not really anything special about this one. It's used exclusively as a means of transportation along wires that leads to predetermined destinations. There's one challenge room in the game that plays around with it a bit and has you time your movement so that you're not hit by enemies, but that's about it. These are also rarely placed down until after you finish the main stories of each level, since they usually just act like a way to get back to certain locations you've been to as you follow the story path. The Jaxi is blazing fast and hard to control, something that's used to good effect in some of the challenge rooms in Sand Kingdom. Just remember that you need to hold the brake button down, not press it continuously. But as for the overworld itself, it makes for an easy and quick way to get around, while also taking in the sights thanks to its relatively barren landscape. Something like the Jaxi wouldn't work in places like the Seaside Kingdom, for example, which is why they instead have the Boost Flower. Like I mentioned, I think this is an objectively better way of getting around than the Gushin, and honestly, I think it's probably the most fun power-up in any of the kingdoms. You collect it with Cappy, and when he returns to you, Mario instantly shoots off in a burst of speed that will last until the flower runs out, where he'll gradually start to lose speed. The first time you encounter these flowers is in Wooded Kingdom, and while they manage to make a good showcase for them by having you run up slopes that are too steep for Mario to run up normally, I still think the environment doesn't lend itself well enough to fully make you appreciate the quirks of this thing though. There's too many obstacles to crash into, making the flower stop working immediately, and by extension, there's not enough room to run around with it and have fun. The first place I think the Boost Flower truly shines is in the Moon Kingdom. When combined with the low gravity, it makes you able to almost literally fly to the other side of the map if you time your jumps well. This is super fun to play around with, but the best part is using it to help you hide balloons in Balloon World. I went at this for hours, dude, trying to perfectly line up everything in order to hide the most unfindable balloon. It didn't work, but hey, I had fun. The best showcase for the Boost Flower though is the Seaside Kingdom. It's big, it's open, and whenever there are flowers available, they make sure to give you multiple ones to collect around the same place. These things actually stack, but while they won't give you more speed for each, they do give you more time, and at any point here, you'll find enough flowers to propel you to the other side of the kingdom. This is also where the attention to detail and Mario's momentum comes back into play. Whenever you have a Boost Flower equipped, you can run on water. With the Seaside Kingdom being like 90% water, that obviously helps, but notice what happens whenever the flower expires when you're in the middle of the ocean. Mario will lose momentum, yes, but he'll also slowly sink into the sea before being swallowed up completely. This is one of those small touches that might go unnoticed, but has a huge impact on the entire feel of the game. This right here is probably my favorite unnecessary detail in games, and if this was any other game than Odyssey, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't even be a thing. But here we are, and I fucking love this attention to detail. Nothing in this game is just here for the sake of being here. Even the poles in New Donk, which might seem unassuming at first, can be captured and used to propel Mario forward. Or upward if they're on the sides of buildings. The evil bonus works the same. There's also just something really funny about fork people being stuck to the sides of skyscrapers. These are also used for a good few platforming challenges, which are really fun. The Pokio works as an extension of these captures in that you can stick your beak into any wall that isn't made of metal or stone or, well, hard things, okay? And use the spring mechanic from there. This is by far my favorite capture in the game because of the freedom it gives you, but it also feels really good to maneuver around with it. If you shake the controller, you'll even fly a bit farther, and then if you shake it again, you'll do a little twirl to further extend your range. We talked about the motion control mechanic in the segmented parts, and all of that still holds true here. You don't actually need to use it, but the capture does feel much better when you do. You can also use this twirl as an attack when you have your beak extended, kinda simulating a well-known attack from another Nintendo IP. Yet again, this isn't actually required for anything, but it's really fun to pull off against Spinies and these bombs. This capture is used throughout most of Bowser's Kingdom and is a pretty good example of the marriage of level design and mechanics that Odyssey does so well. The Pokio is instrumental to almost every bit of progress in this kingdom thanks to its inherent verticality. It is one of the few captures we've talked about so far that's used for actual combat too, since you're expected to use it against the boss in Bowser's Kingdom. But unlike the Gushin and the Lava Bubble, which are both also used for their own respective boss encounters, the Pokio feels more geared towards combat, or at least its attack is used more often, not just to defend yourself, but also to deflect these firework bombs. And this doesn't just happen in Bowser's Kingdom itself, but also in some challenge rooms. These three captures specifically is a big part of why I say that combat and traversal captures are more like subgroups within a main group, because a lot of these could fit into either group, but then again, there are some that couldn't. For the combat side, those would be the bro enemies, Charging Chuck, and especially Sherm and Bowser. The bro enemies are somewhat special. The Fire Bro in particular is actually used more for puzzles than anything else, but since its moveset is pretty much identical to the Cook/Hammer Bro, except that they throw fireballs, I decided to just lump them with the others. I honestly don't know what I expected when I first possessed one of these, but this sure wasn't it. So for some reason, these guys jump constantly whenever they move. Like, they literally can't walk normally. Every time you need to go somewhere with them, you'll be hopping like a rabbit across the ground, and this makes these guys really awkward to control, especially in rooms like this that require a little bit of precision, not just for where to jump, but also for where you throw your pants, because yeah, those are kinda jittery too. It's like you have a cone in front of you, and anytime you press the attack button, the resulting projectile could land anywhere within this cone, which is, again, really annoying to deal with when you have a specific piece you need to get rid of whatever cheese this is that's able to withstand lava and not melt. Like, seriously, is the cheese in the Luncheon Kingdom made of asbestos or what? I think they tried making up for this weird scatter attack by giving them an insane amount of attack speed. I mean, look at that throwing arm! But alas, it's still just as unreliable. This janky movement and random attack pattern is made slightly up for by the jump, however, since even if you're in the middle of a hop, you can still jump normally. So if you're about to plant yourself into the endless abyss or some lava, you can still save yourself from an untimely demise, and using the height, you can throw much farther, which helps in defeating enemies that are heading towards you from further away. This does feel slightly out of place though. The bro enemies are literally the only ones that are able to break the in-game logic like this, and as a result, it never feels good to control them. It's a weird feature considering literally the entire rest of the game adheres to the same core logic, where you're unable to jump unless you have something to jump off of. I mean, they're essentially getting a mid-air jump out of nowhere that's not just a slight nudge, but a huge leap. Well, it is pretty nice for when you refight the brutal machine boss, since you can cheese it pretty hard. Speaking of battles, there's a literal war machine. If possessing your enemies wasn't enough, now you can commit mass genocide with just the press of a button. These ball pit balls doesn't look like they can hurt you, but they pack a mean punch. And oh hey, you can even collect stuff with them, somehow. Capturing Sherm, a Sherm? Is Sherm their individual names or the name of their species? I've been talking about them as if it's the name of a person up until now because I just think it's really funny that someone named their son Sherm. Anyways, capturing a Sherm turns the game into a third-person shooter with tank controls. It takes away pretty much everything that makes Odyssey, but just like most of the other captures, it seems they realized this shortcoming and tried using it only in short bursts and not very often back to back as to not let it overstay its welcome. It's the same with the charging chuck in that vein, since it'll never actually get the chance to get tiresome thanks to you only using it like 2 times throughout the entire game. Once during the main path of the Moon Kingdom and another in this challenge room, which is the whole reason I classified it as a combat capture. It's fine, I guess. There's not really anything happening other than running stuff over, but it's fun, so yeah. It's also a pretty unique capture, all things considered. It's like using a slightly slower boost flower, except you're supposed to run into things. Not one of my favorites, but not bad either. I do think it's severely underused though, and would have loved to see it a bit more. I mean, they could have done something like with the Jaxi, right? And made an obstacle course, or maybe even a switch puzzle where you'd have to use the charging move to get to a certain spot within the time limit in one of the kingdoms. I guess that only leaves Bowser for the combat ones then, huh? If you said you saw this coming, then yeah, okay, I guess I could believe that. But you gotta admit that you were at least a little bit surprised. Considering that the most core aspects of Odyssey is the movement and the capture mechanics, this is a very fitting end to the main story. Bowser is great. He runs, he jumps, he double jumps, and get this, he triple jumps. Bowser jumping like Mario with his hat and mustache is the funniest thing ever, and I can't really explain why. The whole thing is an escape sequence with falling rocks and other obstacles that you'll need to claw or fire blast out of the way. There's even an 8-bit section in the middle. Oh, and this song at the end here is just amazing. The capturable enemies aren't just used as gameplay gimmicks though, they're also used to populate the different kingdoms. Take the T-Rex for example. Despite how I don't think the T-Rex works that well from a gameplay perspective, I still think it does wonders as a set piece. The first time you see it is in the Cascade Kingdom, where it's sleeping peacefully atop a hill. You can capture it to wreak some havoc, and that's the only time you'll actually see it moving until you get to the Wooded Kingdom and fall into the deep woods. I have a lot of problems with this place, by the way. It's a small subsection of the Wooded Kingdom that can only be accessed by falling off of the level within a certain distance from the main area. If you fall down at around the first boss platform, for example, you'll just straight up die, but when you're within the designated areas, you'll instead land down here. The first obvious problem is that if you never fall down, you'll never discover it, and the chances of that are, depending on your skill level of course, considering most platforming challenges where falling out of the level has a high probability of happening, occur outside of this zone. Secondly, there's no map for this place. This is something that also plagues the other sub-areas in the game, like the town in Shiveria, or to a slightly lesser degree, the pathway to the chapel inside the moon in the Moon Kingdom. You're only getting the map of the main part of the kingdom no matter where you are in it, with the Mario indicator staying on the entrance to any sub-area you're in. This also applies to any hint markers you decide to buy, so in places like the Shiverian town that's not only big but also has a lot of moons to collect, you're not actually getting more than a general location. For the deep woods, however, you're not even getting that, and while you can fast travel from any of the other sub-areas mentioned, you can't while in the deep woods, which brings me to the final and biggest problem. Discovering this place by falling into the abyss, expecting to die, is actually really cool. Suddenly, you're dropped into this huge, dark and gloomy forest landscape with poor visibility. As you explore, you start to hear rhythmic thuds in the distance, growing heavier and heavier as they're getting closer and closer, until eventually... Oh my god! Is that a fucking T-Rex with a top hat charging straight at me? I love the aesthetic combined with the T-Rex, I really do, but falling into this place is only cool the first time it happens. As it turns out, it's not as huge as you think. You're being tricked by the lack of light, making everything very disorienting. You're also not dropped into the same place every time you fall. It's based on where in the level you are, but in very broad strokes. There are about 3 or 4 default positions you can land in, each with their own exit. Problem is, they're beanstalks, so you'll have to find the seed dispenser NPC every time you want to grow your way out of there. Thankfully, you only have to do this once for each of the exits, but still, even then you'll have to grab onto it and climb up, making it way more tedious than it needs to be. At this point, you might be asking yourself why you can't just teleport out, right? Well, because you deadass can't. From the moment you land in this place until the moment you get out, every single fast travel point is grayed out and impossible to select. This makes it so that falling off of the level and ending up here is a worse punishment than actually dying because it takes so long to get back up. It won't happen a lot, but even just those 5 or 6 times it'll happen as you complete the kingdom is enough to make you never want to take any risks when traversing it. It's that bad. Outside of the atmosphere, it's even just a bad part of the kingdom to begin with. There aren't any special challenges. The most complex one down there is a pipe puzzle that you'll need to complete by trying and failing multiple times, since there's no actual way to figure out which pipe to go in outside of trial and error. Excuse me, it has lately come to my attention that Mario will look at the correct pipe if you stand still. What the f***? How are you supposed to figure that out? Who even stands still in this game on purpose? And the rest of the moons are found by either moving static objects or ground pounding underneath a fossil rock after having crushed it with the dino. Capturing the dino is maybe the hardest challenge of them all, since you'll need to have it charge into a wall or something before you're allowed to knock its head off and finally possess it. And even then, there's a time limit on it, so you might not even have time to crush the correct block before you'll have to wait for it to respawn and do it all over again. There is a version of this that I actually like in one of the challenge rooms, but like, that's enough. I don't need to crush any more rocks than that one time. It's spent, used, done. Please don't make me do this anymore. There is one more instance of the T-Rex that I like though, which is that one challenge room in New Donk where you're being chased by it while riding a scooter. It's basically there to be an antagonist, and I really like how it just falls from the sky all of a sudden and starts chasing you. The suspense the room builds up by not having anything there from the get-go is instantly elevated into fear once the dino comes into play. Despite this obvious mishmash of the Mesozoic era and modern society, it doesn't feel completely out of place. In fact, nothing in Odyssey is superfluous or placed somewhere just to have something there. It all contributes to the overall game, and this of course extends to the enemies and their placements. Whenever you happen upon a Goomba, for example, chances are that there's something they can be used for within close proximity. Some people might point to this and call it bad game design because they'll instantly start stacking Goombas in order to clear the inevitable challenge, but I'd argue that this is the developers successfully bringing the player into their line of thinking. Also, look at it this way. In a game like Odyssey, where your enemies aren't obstacles you need to overcome, but rather tools to be used for your own benefit, how weird and frustrating wouldn't it be to be presented with a tool with nowhere to use it? Like, imagine there being Goombas, or any other enemy for that matter, in the game in a place where there wasn't a corresponding activity to use them for. It's like a puzzle with a missing centerpiece, only the piece wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. This is part of why I think the level design in Odyssey is so strong. There's purpose to everything. They've also clearly pulled inspiration from every past 3D game so far. I'd say the main level and platforming design itself is mostly reminiscent of 64, with the linear challenge rooms obviously being inspired from the floodless sections in Sunshine with a pinch of galaxy magic added to them. In that sense, I think Odyssey, at least design-wise, isn't as much a continuation of 64 and Sunshine like in this graphic Nintendo released when Odyssey was announced, but more an amalgamation and refinement of all of these games combined, with 64 acting as a base. Like in 64, Mario is placed in one of the corners of a level and he is guided through it with a mission structure which resembles that of Sunshine and Galaxy. This gives the player an incentive to explore and learn the layout of the kingdom. This path itself is often very linear in the sense that no matter which route you take, you'll always have to go through specific points of interest in order to progress. While most of the levels in 64 and Sunshine are very open-ended, Sunshine especially has a very rigid structure in how you progress in the levels and unlock new shines to collect. For example, in 64 you have access to almost every star from the beginning, except for the few that requires the level to be in a different state, which can only be altered during star select. In Sunshine you mostly only have access to the shine you choose on the episode select screen, and this is because, just like in some cases in 64, they alter the level significantly from episode to episode. This rigid structure is completely gone in Odyssey. It's like they combined the open-endedness of 64 with the linearity of Galaxy and the structure of Sunshine. You can collect enough moons to move on without even touching the main story in the kingdoms, kinda like in 64. But if you want the state of the kingdom to change in order to unlock more moons to collect, you'll need to complete the half-open, half-linear main path of the kingdom. These aren't the only aspects that persist from the old games either. Believe it or not, the boot out system is still here, albeit not in the same severity. In Odyssey, you're only being booted back to the ship whenever you collect a multi-moon at the end of a string of objectives, and this is done in order to alter the state of the level. This also usually unlocks more moons for you to find, and that's the system's biggest weak point. If you fully explore the kingdoms before these changes take place, you'll miss out on a lot of the clues that appear once the state of the kingdom changes. In fact, it's not just the clues that won't be there, the moons themselves won't either. I like how they handled this in Tostarena with the ice, making it clear that there is something that will unlock later, but even here, there's stuff that just suddenly appear out of nowhere. And this is also the case in all of the other kingdoms as well. In Cascade, for example, certain doors to challenge rooms will be blocked off by boulders that looks like they're supposed to be there. There's nothing cluing you in to think about going back later and checking if something unlocked as the state of the kingdom changes. I really like how the worlds feel alive and that NPCs from other kingdoms will start to appear in ones they aren't native to, but I still think this was badly handled. Especially in a game like Odyssey that's supposed to reward exploration. In comparison to 64 and Sunshine though, these changes are permanent and can't be rolled back through a star select screen, which is kinda sad because I really like the look of Nighttime Tostarena. This soft boot out is done to highlight the changes being made to the kingdom, just like they did in 64 and Sunshine. Back in my Super Mario 64 video, I went over a theory I had for why they had the boot out mechanic in the first place. I concluded that, considering how they essentially force you to travel from one edge of the map to another multiple times, they were teaching the player the layout, making sure they would have seen everything and preparing them for the eventual 8 red coin and 100 coin stars, which often span the entire level. I found that it's much the same in Odyssey. See, I did a little experiment in a fresh playthrough. I decided to only follow the main objectives of each kingdom and see how far that would take me. I think my findings here are really interesting actually. As it turns out, just completing the main objectives will never give you enough moons to move on to the next kingdom. You're required to actually go out and explore. The thing is though, that throughout almost all the kingdoms, you're given hints or even explicitly being shown moons off in the distance throughout the main path, and when you tally them up, they always give you just the amount you need in addition to the story moons, or even overshoot the amount a bit, to unlock the next kingdom. And those moons are just the first in a string of moons you'll discover when you decide to go grab them. This also means that because of how you only unlock all the moons once you finish the main story, you're placed in kind of a disadvantageous situation if you decide to go and collect those moons. You could also make that point about the ones that are unlocked from the moon rock in the post game, but those are all marked on your map the instant you unlock them, so it's pretty clear Nintendo anticipated that this could be a problem, but it is a slight issue with the ones unlocked as you're playing the kingdom. They tried to remedy this though by using different techniques elsewhere in the kingdoms to put you on the right path. Almost every scene transition shows off a moon. I mean, look at this camera pan in the Wooded Kingdom for when you travel through this pipe, for example. And almost every situation you find yourself in will have the camera naturally point towards some kind of hint, because remember, there's nothing in Odyssey that's not placed there without intention. So when you jump up on this pillar to collect this moon and see a building in the distance, you instantly know that there's a moon hiding there. And it goes even deeper than that. It goes past simple observational skills and dives into the subconsciousness of the player. Listen, I don't know why I thought to ground pound on this sand dune right here, or this puddle. There was just something telling me that there's something hidden here, and I was right. In retrospect, I realized that the reason I felt that way was because the sand dune was the tallest out of any of the surrounding ones, and the puddle was the only body of water that were completely contained by the surrounding landmass, and was also elevated so that the enemy in it appeared taller than the others. This game works its ass off to groom the player into subconsciously noticing stuff like this, to force you into the mindset of the developers. You're taught that anything that seems off is worth exploring, either with glowing spots in special places, unusual geometry, or my all-time favorite, birds. The way birds are handled here is nothing short of revolutionary. Whenever you see a bird resting on the ground, there's something there, guaranteed. Like, seriously, watch parts of the video again where I talk about things that might seem a bit obscure. There are birds that are sitting on the cactus that's out in the open of the desert in the Sand Kingdom. I mean, it is kind of amazing how well they signal to the player that there's something hidden here. This could be as simple as the way forward, a hidden challenge room, or even a moon. It's like the red objects in Mirror's Edge, only much more subtle. Like, look at this challenge room, for example. There's a bunch of bonsai bills firing at you from their cannons with a vine road pushing you forward. Suddenly, you see a bird resting on top of one of the cannons. Weird, you think to yourself. Why would there be a bird here, of all places? This confusion turns to realization once you round the corner and find a power moon just floating there, ripe for the taking. I can't stress enough how ingenious I think this approach is. There's no hand-holding in Odyssey. The devs instead went to, frankly, absurd lengths to cue you in on their specific mindset, and when it works, goddamn is it satisfying. When it doesn't, well, that's when we start running into problems, isn't it? I have full sympathy for the people who can't find the more cryptic moons, because some of them are just not intuitive at all, even if you're on the same wavelength as the devs. There is hope though. There's the hint systems. For some reason, throughout all the videos I watched about Odyssey during my work stream, not a single one mentioned the hint systems, except for a brief passing by Joseph Anderson, who completely misunderstood the entire point of them.
There is a hint system, but that's clearly a last-ditch effort, a safety net. If you're actually meant to run to this parrot and get a hint for every moon, then the game is even more tedious and drawn out than I thought.
And that is very odd, because some of these guys had some really harsh words to say about how impossible it is to find some of these moons. The thing is, I believe that the hint system is an integral part to this game. This also goes back to 64, where you'd get hints on the star select screen for every star. If you're having trouble finding a moon, you're supposed to go ask the Talkatoo or the Hint Toad. There's just no way around that. You don't have to. You'll most likely be able to find enough moons to access the darker side without doing it even once, but if you want that gold sail, eventually you will have to consult the hint gods. That's how the game was designed. These systems are here for the people who don't vibe or notice the finer details, and that's fine. You're not cheating or anything. The hints are in the game for a reason. So bitching about bench friends for like a full minute because you've imposed some sort of optional challenge on yourself when you're not using hints for some reason is some of the worst basis for criticism I have ever heard. You chose this for yourself. And no, you don't have to go talk to the parrot for every single moon. What are you, blind? Any player would find enough moons in the kingdoms to unlock all the content. The hints are supposed to be used for those last moons you just can't find if you're going for 100%. Anyways, that's the kind of freedom you're given. It's also because of this that there are so many moons in each kingdom. You're free to pick and choose which challenges you want to attempt or just explore the level. The amount of moons is also a product of the Switch being a handheld console. Quoting the director, Kenta Motokura, the goal of the dev team was to make it so that you could bring out your Switch when you have a couple of free minutes, collect some moons, and then go about your day again. As a side effect of this, a lot of the moons might seem very in your face. Though, like I said, this is because the game constantly draws your attention to them in the hopes of stringing you along a path of new discoveries. People have tried to lump the moons into groups in order to justify their opinions of whether they're good or bad as a whole, but I think that line of thinking ends up with the conclusion that a lot of the moons are unnecessary, and that kinda defeats the entire purpose of the design behind them. None of the moons are truly unnecessary because the player isn't meant to track them all down one by one as if they're checking tasks off a list. For the main part of the game, your mission is collecting enough moons to move on, yet I'd wager that no one actually stops there. Odyssey actively encourages you to explore the kingdoms either through objectives in the distance or just the pure joy of moving Mario around. The thing is, the rewards in Odyssey aren't the moons themselves, it's having an excuse to play the game. The moons are structured more like Xbox achievement than anything else, just slight nudges to get you to do specific things within the game. They're nothing more than the devs telling you, good job on clearing this, or thanks for exploring our levels, in a way. And in a game like Odyssey that thrives so much on simply controlling Mario and showing off the levels, that's enough for a lot of people. Little side note, this is also why I don't mind the actual moons you get from the in-game achievement system, which are required for the gold sale, by the way, because when you've collected all the rest of the moons, you've already organically completed like 90% of them, or even more. The only thing that truly sucks about this system is having to mash A through all the dialogue. That still doesn't stop people from coming up with some crazy conspiracy theories about why there are so many moons in the game though. This is your warning. I am about to tear into the worst, most nonsensical argument I heard during my workstream research for why there are so many moons in Odyssey. If you don't like that kind of stuff, which is fine and I totally understand that, feel free to skip ahead to this timestamp. Still here? Alright. Let me introduce you to the most hilariously deranged explanation as for why Nintendo decided to include as many moons as they did in Odyssey.
Why then does Odyssey feel the need to shove so much extraneous content into its runtime? I believe it's to account for the fact that the boot-out system no longer exists.
Oh, really? Then what's happening right here? Listen, I understand what he's trying to say here, but despite it not being used to as much of an effect as in 64 or Sunshine, the boot-out mechanic still very much exists, and it's plain to see, so acting like that's not the case seems kinda disingenuous.
I really do think that's all there is to it. Do you truly believe Odyssey would still have this many moons if the boot-out system still existed?
Of course Odyssey wouldn't have this many moons if the game still used the boot-out system just as heavily as the previous games. What is he trying to say right here exactly? Would 64 and Sunshine have more stars if they didn't have the boot-out system? Of course not, and that's because, as I've detailed multiple times by now, the boot-out system is an integral part in the design of 64 and Sunshine. If they didn't have that system, the odds are that they'd be completely different games, and there's no way to know the direction they would have taken instead. He also brings up how this was clearly a problem that presented itself during development.
Clearly there was a problem during development. A problem that likely said, this game will be full price, so it cannot be this short.
While this level of confidence is pretty funny when you're right about something, it absolutely decimates your credibility when it's clearly stated in pre-release marketing materials and interviews that this was not a problem, but a conscious design decision by the team in order to facilitate short play sessions. Did this guy do even a smidgen of research on this topic, or is he just making things up to fit his own narrative?
This is yet another reason I despise the hours equals $ approach, because it needlessly adds on top of games that can't handle that weight anymore.
And there we have it. Hey, look at me guys, I really don't like how people complain about length in video games, but instead of making a separate video about it, I'm going to just shoehorn it into this one.
If you took out the extraneous moons in Odyssey, which I consider almost 60% of its moons, you would end up with a game that lasts at most 7 or 8 hours, which for the gamers of today is apparently not good enough. Odyssey couldn't afford to just do what the other Mario games did. Justify that runtime by making a game that's replayable.
I'd call it borderline virtue signaling if I didn't think he actually believed this to be a clever gotcha moment. Which it isn't. His entire argument rests on flimsy evidence, like how removing the moons he calls extraneous, which would be about 60% of them, will shorten the game to about 7 or 8 hours. There's nothing being presented to explain what he means by this, but thinking about it for more than 5 seconds reveals that this simply wouldn't add up. I mean, 40% of 880 is 352, which is already 2.8 times the amount of moons you need to fight Bowser. And seeing as I did a 124 moon playthrough for my research, it's pretty easy to just add up the time spent between those 3 sessions, which results in 3 hours and 30 minutes rounded down. Or 210 minutes for simplicity's sake. 210 times 2.8 is 588 minutes, or 9 hours and 48 minutes. So already there, even with me subtracting 11 minutes from my playtime, we're already way ahead of the 7 to 8 hour estimation by King K. But we're not even remotely done yet though. I just really need to hammer in how dumb of an argument this is, because while admittedly my gameplay time is based on first clearing every kingdom's main story path and then going back to find moons I was missing, I'm also running through this game at top speed, skipping every cutscene and only going for the easiest moons. I know everything I need to do and everywhere I need to go at this point, so you could easily assume that a first-time player would spend even more time than this. But then we arrive at the crux of this horrible reasoning. In this clip, he states that this estimation is after removing 60% of the extraneous moons. Not the random ones that you find out in the wild, but the ones he regards as filler. This means that the ones that are left in this scenario are the challenge rooms and stuff like that, right? We can assume that to be correct, right? I don't have any metrics for this, but like I said, I only went for the easy ones. Now imagine how much more gameplay time you'd get out of the ones that incorporate challenges. Yeah, doing actual research is kinda like cheating, isn't it? He did try to support his arguments about Nintendo stretching the playtime out with these 2 Twitter posts, which I suppose are meant to imply that petty Twitter discourse in some form made its way to our Lord and Savior Shigeru Miyamoto himself, but these are from January of 2019. You know, posts from over an entire year after the game released. Even then, just the notion that Nintendo, the company that's infamous for doing whatever they believe to be the best course of action, would actually listen to this kind of feedback is ridiculous. Hell, the article here from Forbes, which was released before Devil May Cry 5 was even out, isn't actually making a huge statement about the length of the game. The only thing that's polarizing about this article is the headline, and that's just to generate clicks. If you wanted to build any sort of credence to the argument about game length, at least use an example that has more than 11 replies and 0 likes. Or hey, maybe one from before the game in question was released. I mean, I know for a fact that this was an ongoing discussion even back then, but I guess a random post without any engagement or one from some obscure forum no one's using doesn't hold quite the same weight as Twitter does. Though believing that Twitter discourse actually matters in real life is a telltale sign of someone that's terminally online. For the sake of your own mental health, please go touch grass and give the internet a break. I'm begging you here, because the more you interact with all this made-up fake outrage, the more it will compound and your mental state will gradually start to deteriorate faster and faster. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for the padding arc, but there's a few more nuggets I want to break down here.
Since this game is on the Nintendo Switch, and Nintendo are seemingly obsessed with designing games around a hardware philosophy now, Odyssey necessitated an amount of moons that could be obtained in short bursts and last people dozens and dozens of hours.
First of all, he claims that Nintendo is all of a sudden obsessed with designing games around their hardware philosophy, which makes me wonder, what then is all of this? Mario, and especially 3D Mario, has always been at the forefront for not only Nintendo Systems' graphical capabilities, but also their gimmicks. This isn't something that just started out of the blue with Odyssey and the Switch. 64 was in 3D and had a controllable camera. Sunshine used the analog shoulder buttons to control the pressure output from Flood. The Galaxy games used motion controls for the single most important move in the game and the pointer to pick things up. And 3D World made full use of the Wii U pad. You even had to blow into the microphone to move certain platforms. Have you even played a single 3D Mario game before in your fucking life? And the misconceptions continue with the claim that there isn't a hub world.
Thus, Odyssey has an identity crisis. For example, one of the defining traits of a collectathon is the hub world. Super Mario Odyssey doesn't have a hub world, which feels so unbefitting of the subgenre it's attempting to emulate.
Although I'm a bit more inclined to excuse this one simply because there isn't one hub world, there are multiple. Pretty much every kingdom in Odyssey is its own self-contained hub world. There's just no way around it. They check all the boxes. Explorable area? Check. Entrances to other places and challenges? Check. And that's pretty much it. The notion that a hub world is this intricately defined thing exists only in the closed-up minds of people with too strong opinions. There are some other small logical inconsistencies and bad takes here and there, but the video as a whole is okay. It's just that the issues I highlighted here completely ruins most of the opinions expressed as a whole. As always though, I'll link to the video in the description, and I highly recommend you go and watch it with the full context of the rest of the retrospective in order to make your own opinions. Because even though the reasoning was kinda bonkers, Kincaid still does have a point about the padding to a certain degree. Listen, I'll be the first one to admit, there are a lot of repeating moons here. Joseph Anderson wasn't that far off when he organized them all into categories and concluded that there's way too many moons you do the same thing in order to acquire. Except for when he said there was only 6 moons that was gotten from platforming gauntlets, which even without being able to properly assess the different categories he places the others in, is just not true at all, but whatever. I think he missed the point a bit though. First of all, because of the nature of the game and how you're not always locked to one single method of acquiring a moon, you can't really fit them each into just one category. Also, a lot of the time it's not about simply collecting the moons, but what you do in order to find them. This train of thought also relies on the notion that you're going through these categories doing the moons all after one another, which just isn't the case if you're playing the game normally. Sure, you can go out of your way to collect them all in this way, but with that logic, you would most likely choose to only go for the fun moons and have the time of your life. But you can't, because these arguments doesn't hold any water unless you already know where each and every moon is, something you won't do during a first playthrough. If you were to do this during a second playthrough, you'd probably find that a lot of the challenges themselves, at least until post-game, just aren't strong enough to truly have fun with unless you go out of your way to make them harder or try to solve them in a different way. I think the replayability for Odyssey is more limited than for previous 3D Mario games because of this, especially in a third or higher playthrough. It's fun noticing small stuff on a repeat, but that's just it. It's mostly the small stuff you'll be noticing if you've already 100%ed it multiple times. You're most likely not going to get the enjoyment out of figuring out the Sand Dune or the Seaside Kingdom puddle moons even the second time around, because by now you know they're there by virtue of having already found them. Having found them once completely erases the surprise of finding them the second time. In fact, you'll probably find a lot of these moons the second time even within the same playthrough. Odyssey does this stupid thing where everything in a level respawns once you either collect a multi-moon or switch kingdoms. Except the purple coins and moons you've already collected are now glass-like and see-through. What doesn't change in such a way are the glowing spots on the ground, or crates, and other similar things containing moons. And while you're probably going to remember having collected most of them, what if there's a new moon inside that bird flying over there after the level changed and unlocked more moons? Shouldn't I catch it before it gets away just to be sure now that I've spotted it? I mean, how hard can it be? Yeah, it sucks, and there's no excuse for it being this way, really. I mean, you can check the map to see if you've already found it, but often that takes more time than just ground pounding the spot anyway, so bleh. I feel like this could also be a valid argument for the repetitive moon complaint, but strangely, I never saw it presented that way. A lot of people bring up the hint art system as an argument for this too. To yet again quote King K,
There didn't need to be more of them to pad out the game.
I think what the hint art specifically does really well is highlight how diverse and unique the different kingdoms are. I mean, you can take one look at any of these and almost instantly recognize which kingdom they're referencing. Like this one pointing to a moon hidden on the helipad in Metro Kingdom, or this one pointing towards a moon hidden between 2 columns in Seaside. Hell, even this picture, that might seem too abstract to extract any information from, is clearly from Lost Kingdom, because just like how the Metro Kingdom is the only place you'll find that helipad symbol since it's a city, and Seaside is the only place you'll find both those parasols and those columns, Lost Kingdom is the only place that uses these ground textures. It's hard to know exactly where the moons are hidden sometimes, but at least you know that they're somewhere in a specific level. The fact that they're so easily recognized from just a tiny little zoomed in picture shows that the kingdoms each have a very strong visual identity. And this is also one of the strongest aspects of Super Mario Odyssey. Is it repetitive though? There are a lot of them, and the way you collect them is ultimately by ground pounding a spot on the ground. True, but this is where we go back to the counter argument of how and when you find them versus how you collect them. Let's retrace a bit back to JA's moon list so that I can use it as a jumping off point for my own opinions.
The majority of the prep work for this video was cataloging every moon in the game to find out exactly how many of them are a waste of time and or repeated content. As you can see from these categories, there's a ton of repetition. Depressingly enough, only 6 moons out of 880 ended up being put under a miscellaneous jumping group.
A lot of his arguments are sound. When you do the same thing again and again and again for the same reward each time, it takes away a bit of what makes the reward special. The way he presents this section though makes me feel like his logic rests on people doing these same moons one after the other, or that you would focus on just one of these filler moons at the time. And that's just not how anyone plays the game. Take his points on Bench Friends or the Find the Hat moons, for example. Now, I won't tell you how you should play this game, or any game really, that's up to you, but if you're treating Odyssey like an objective-based game like the previous 3D Marios where you choose a star and hunt it down, you're doing yourself a disservice. I think this is also why Nintendo is so hesitant to give you the titles for each moon, limiting you to only 3 at a time, because you get so locked into those specific objectives that you forget that there's other stuff you can do while you're looking for the hats with ice or glowing rocks to kick. Speaking of, he brings up the rocks too, but I think he misrepresents just how little effort it actually takes to find these. Rocks are usually put down in places you'll run past anyways, and kicking them is effortless, you just need to run into them. Also, there's like 4 or 5 rocks in total. This is stuff that you're supposed to find organically, not hunt down with a vengeance. And if you're still missing the rock moons when you've collected everything else, well, that's what the hint system is for. Maybe I'm biased because I don't actually mind the rocks. I mean, you mostly just kick them about for a minute or less, except for the one in Ruined Kingdom that takes 50 kicks. But that's actually the best one, since it lets you play around with it and try to combo it as many times as possible. I think I got to 4 before it broke, and I was actually sad that it was already over at that point. Again, so much of this game is about making your own fun. Of course, breaking a rock is going to be boring if you just keep running into it without even trying to do any tricks. I don't think this guy has ever touched a football in his life. I also want to point out that throwing a rock from high up makes it break faster is apparently a ridiculous notion, according to Joseph. The thing is, though, that I kind of understand where these people are coming from, but it's not about how there are so many similar moons, rather that the moons themselves have no value starting from when you defeat Bowser. I think they're fine up until that point, because you actually need a certain amount to move on, but as I briefly mentioned during the post-game, you can freely buy as many moons as you wish for a mere 100 coins each. Now, prior to February 21st of 2018, 100 coins was actually quite expensive despite the coin counter maxing out at 9,999 coins, just by virtue of there being so much other stuff you could buy for coins also, some of which even costing 9,999 coins. So why waste currency on some stupid moon you could get literally anywhere else when you could use them to buy a sweet baseball outfit, right? Well, like I mentioned, these are here basically to help people reach the different thresholds for the dark side and darker side of the moon, just in case they're physically unable to find enough moons for some reason. With the introduction of Balloon World, however, where you can easily earn 9,999 coins in the matter of like half an hour, suddenly all you need to do to access the endgame locations is collect the required 127 moons to clear the game and unlock Balloon World, and then spend a couple of hours just grinding challenges for increasingly better rewards, and then buying moons as you top out your coin counter. I did this, but not on purpose. I knew that there was a bunch of moons you had to purchase in order to reach 999 moons, but I also thought that the shop would stop you from buying more than you actually needed. Turns out, that was not the case. So since I thought it'd be fun to turn in all those moons at the same time, in addition to the moons I'd already gotten in the Mushroom Kingdom, I spent like 2 hours just playing Balloon World and buying moons. Don't get me wrong, I actually had a blast. Balloon World is perhaps the most ingenious thing Nintendo has ever come up with, and so perfectly highlights how well designed the levels in Odyssey are and the stuff you can achieve with Mario's movement through essentially a global melding pot of ideas created by a ton of different people. But at the end of the day, I ended up buying way too many moons and completely lost any motivation to go on just because it all felt so pointless. This is where the idea of the moons not being the reward for challenges, but rather the carrot to get you to attempt them come into play. But it's still demoralizing, especially if that's not how you feel about them to begin with. In line with this thinking, to a lot of people, Odyssey just doesn't feel like a proper Mario game. And yeah, I can kinda sympathize with this point of view. After all, gone are the many absurd and geographically impossible locations, which have been replaced with less absurd and possible locations. I mean, they're still kinda video gamey, but with the design focused on them being more like actual locations, I can totally see how you're not getting that same feeling of getting thrown into a video game world that you're getting from the other 3D Mario titles. Even Sunshine, a game where its levels were purposefully designed as vacation spots for tourists, still has this absurdist feel to them that greets you the moment you enter most of the levels. Take Bianco Hills, for example. One of the more normal levels. You spawn on the top of a hill and the only path down is being sprayed with water that flows into a river at the bottom. And the only way to cross over to the actual village is to swim or balance on a tightrope. Then there's Rico Harbor. There's a ship here, sure, but how are you actually supposed to get over to the other part of the level except for climbing the ship? And what the actual hell are all these random platforms out on the water for exactly? And don't even get me started on Noki Bay and all these giant natural shells balancing on the top of these man-made pillars. I don't think I have to bring up any examples from the other games, considering one involves jumping into magical paintings and the other taking place in space, but my point is that this is something you'll never see in Odyssey, or at least not to this extent. The core theme of the game being traveling means that the locations you're visiting will be designed with a greater focus on being actual places, and actual places usually strive to accommodate their surroundings to their inhabitants. This means that there will be a logical way to get from one place to another, and there won't be giant structures that only serves as platforming challenges for Mario, at least when it comes to the buildings and objects that are supposed to be integral parts of the kingdoms. That's not to say that there aren't any absurd places in Odyssey, it's just that they're hidden away behind a facade of city planning, so it's rarely immediately obvious in the same way that it is with all the other games, despite there being just as many, if not more, platforming opportunities within the levels themselves. This kind of design works to Odyssey's advantage and helps bring out the rest of the design mechanics, like the hint art or other hidden moons. Do you remember what I said earlier about how the devs hides moons in locations that seems out of place? That wouldn't really work unless there's something that sticks out compared to the rest of the world you're in, and this makes the rest of the level design feel sort of plain in comparison to other titles. There's also the matter of difficulty. Like I talked about previously, I do think Mario's moveset combined with the mild punishment from failing makes you want to experiment more, but having the easy options for challenges being so readily available and the punishment for death being getting put back 10 seconds of playtime and the loss of a measly 10 coins also removes most of the fear of failure, and this doesn't make you as invested in clearing the challenges as in previous games where you'd have to climb all the way back up tick-tock clock if you fell down at the top, or try and collect all the red coins again if you died before getting the shine in the River of Death. Even the Galaxy games had this feeling of tension despite also having checkpoints in the middle of levels, because not only could you risk being put back a sizable distance from where you died, but you also ran the risk of losing all your lives, which would result in you having to do the entire level again from scratch. Then there's the captures. It's a relatively unique concept for sure, but is it fitting to use in a Mario game? I think the devs spent a lot of time refining this part in order to not make it too overbearing, and it feels like they mostly succeeded. The captures that takes the most away from the Mario experience aren't used that often, while the returning ones usually involve some kind of platforming, and like I've mentioned multiple times at this point, you can still use Mario himself to circumvent a lot of these challenges with some clever jumping. In summary, Super Mario Odyssey is first and foremost a collector's playground. Sure, there are boss fights and enemies to defeat, but they mostly take a back seat to exploration and discovery. The boss fights in question are mostly very simple, and the enemies that can't be captured are super easy to either defeat or just avoid altogether. The problem that arises when a game has this degree of focus is how varied can you make the core activity without making it feel too bloated. Finding stuff, which is arguably Odyssey's main focus, is already a very unstructured concept. So how do you go about structuring it into something that's fitting for a video game? And that's just it. At first glance, Odyssey, not taking into account the missions of each world, seems like a very unstructured game, until you take into consideration all the small touches and overall actions the devs have taken in order to guide the player through the levels in order to find power moons, and most importantly, have fun. Of course, this presents its own set of issues. Not everyone are going to vibe with the devs on what their intentions are, and this, of course, makes it so that these players are not going to have as good of a time as the ones that do follow along, and that's a shame. But for what it's worth, I truly believe that the devs managed to strike an almost uncanny balance here between, as stupid as this might sound, cryptic messaging and honest-to-good game design. There's just something that's so special about noticing these small little instances of birds being placed at odd locations, or environmental geography almost speaking directly to your lizard brain, telling you that there's something hidden right here, that it completely overshadows moons like Bench Friends, or all those nut ones or whatever. I won't deny that Odyssey can be a mixed bag, but when looking at the entire package, there's just nothing else like it. To me, the Galaxy games will still be the shining example of 3D Mario platforming for a variety of reasons, but Super Mario Odyssey still deserves a spot in this ever-growing lineup of fantastic games, despite its flaws. Considering how Odyssey is mostly considered a step in a new direction for 3D Mario platformers, despite how untrue that might or might not be, what is going to be the next step? A lot of people likes to bring up the side mode of the Switch port of Super Mario 3D World, Bowser's Fury, as a dream scenario of how a new 3D Mario might play out. But is that actually a viable direction for the series? Well, if you want to find out, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, because that video is in the works and will be out sometimes. Well, thank you all for watching. I'll see you later. Bye. Oh, and this is where we'll have the Patreon lists of people who's part of the Patreon. So whenever that happens, if, you know. Yeah. What am I doing?